The other week, I stopped by Screenland Armor, a small independent movie theater in North Kansas City.
Hi, I ordered my tickets online.
It is a very beloved place to catch a flick, especially this time of the year, when it's so dark and cold outside. You can smell the buttery movie theater popcorn before you even walk in.
If a building didn't smell like popcorn and I went in to watch a movie, I'm questioning where I'm at.
This is Screenland Armor owner Adam Roberts, who naturally swears they have the best movie theater popcorn in town.
Our popcorn is particularly good because we use a butter-flavored salt that makes it aromatic. That is what you smell when you're outside down the street.
There is something uniquely thrilling about going to the movies. Settling into your seat and watching the previews fade to black, popcorn in hand. Today, it's almost unthinkable to see a film without popcorn. From the smallest one-screen indie theater to the biggest multiplex, they're inseparable. Which is why it's pretty crazy that 100 years ago, popcorn wasn't even allowed in movie theaters. Hey, I'm Mackenzie Martin. This is the People's History of Kansas City, and on this episode, Happy National Popcorn Day. We're celebrating by getting to the bottom of a very important question. How did popcorn become the ultimate cinema snack?
There is the sensory overload of walking in and smelling fresh popcorn, going into the theater, the crunch of it while you're enjoying something and escaping together.
It turns out that our love of movie popcorn is a story that takes us through the Great Depression, World War II, and even Kansas City. Because it was here in KC where a widow named Julia Braden talked her way into a movie palace and became one of the first people to sell concessions in a movie theater lobby. Okay, before we go any further, I have to bring in the biggest popcorn lover I know, our very own Suzanne Hogan.
Wow, I like being introduced like that.
So I have a lot to tell you about what I have been digging into. But first, tell us about your popcorn love.
I mean, I love a lot of things, but when I think about food groups and things that I like to enjoy, I just love popcorn. When I'd walk to school, I went to St. Elizabeth's grade school, and I used to walk to school in the morning, and we would walk right by the Topsy's plant, so you'd always get the smell of popcorn, which was just like the best.
For years now, people have been buying Topsy's canisters of popcorn treats for the holidays because they know when it comes to rich, wholesome flavor, Topsy's popcorn treats can't be beat.
I like spicy popcorn. I also have like a real weak spot for the powdery cheese popcorn. I can devour a bag of that in a way that's like messed up.
Have you ever asked yourself where it all started? Like why you love popcorn?
That's not a question I've asked myself, but I think just growing up, we would like walk to the VHS store and like pick out some movies for the weekend.
Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
My nostalgia and memory for like VHS and old movies and making a bag of microwave popcorn just kind of all go hand in hand.
I love that. So there are two histories that we're going to get into today, movie theaters and popcorn, and they sort of start out separate and then they converge. And I'm going to start with popcorn because I talked to the popcorn historian for this.
I am Andrew F. Smith. I am a professor at the New School University in New York.
How do you become a popcorn historian?
So he is the author of Popped Culture, A Social History of Popcorn in America. And he wrote it back in 1999, but he is still the leading person that people talk to about popcorn.
I still love popcorn. And I had some 2 nights ago. I just want you to know, not because of you.
So according to Andrew, popcorn originated in what is now southern Mexico from this tall grass called teosinte. Nearly 10,000 years ago, indigenous communities realized that if certain types of kernels, which were otherwise inedible, reached a high temperature, they would burst through the tough seed coat. It was a sight to behold. Like, the popcorn got incorporated into certain feasts and celebrations, and it also catches the attention of European colonizers who arrive in the 1400s.
And all of a sudden, everyone said, well, we could do something with this. They began to figure out ways of popping it so that it didn't burn up in the fire and you could eat it.
In the mid-1800s, Americans started using wire baskets to cook popcorn over the fire. And suddenly it was way more delicious and easier to cook.
Have you ever made popcorn over a fire?
I have not. Have you?
Yeah, it's fun.
You know, it's interesting you say it's fun because this is partly how popcorn got so famous. In addition to popcorn being this cheap, delicious snack, Americans became sort of obsessed with the act of popping corn. Making popcorn was like this whimsical recreational activity. People would have popcorn parties and compete over who was better at popping it. They used to eat popcorn like a cereal with milk. You'd also see recipes in like Good Housekeeping for popcorn balls, popcorn pudding, popcorn pie, popcorn biscuits.
Popcorn biscuits? That sounds great.
So there was also popcorn taffy, popcorn soup, popcorn salads, popcorn cookies.
Ooh, macaroons.
At first, it was sort of difficult to make really good popcorn, but that all changed in 1893 at the World's Fair in Chicago, when Charles Creters and Company unveiled the first popcorn machine. So this is a device that tossed popcorn as it cooked, which made it way easier to make popcorn in bulk and opened the door for more innovation, like Charles Manley's popcorn machine, which was invented right here in Kansas City, Missouri.
The best popcorn in town is Manley's High Pop, America's favorite popcorn. Crisp, savory, wonderful.
And these are the types of popcorn machines that the main character of our story, Julia Braden, might have used when she came on the concession scene around 1915.
Okay. Well, so tell me more about this Julia Braden character. Was she from Kansas City?
Julia M. Braden was raised on a farm in Illinois, the daughter of a hardworking German immigrant. So she grew up churning butter, gathering eggs, sewing. Then after she got married, she became sort of a traveling salesman. She would go around with her husband, and together they'd sell medicine and ink and lotions. At some point, she settles here in Kansas City, and tragically, her husband dies. So she's all alone, and this is the early 1900s, so she's stressed. She has to figure out how to pay her bills, and she starts seeing these popcorn stands around town, and she thinks, okay, I can do this.
So by this point, there were already, like, popcorn was on the scene and popcorn was around as something you could get at a stand, like, just out in the world.
Yeah. And it was pretty profitable. Like, the early 1900s, after this new popcorn machine comes out, it's a good business.
Like, what kind of places are we talking? Like,
on the street.
But you'd also get it at fairs and parks and obviously baseball games.
Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back. Let me root.
So it's already kind of a snack that people would associate with something that they could eat while on the go or being entertained.
Exactly. So Julia starts her first stand when she's in her early 50s, right? But this is laborious work. She's getting up early, she's popping popcorn, shelling, blanching, and roasting peanuts. She's delivering it around town in a suitcase. She brands her popcorn as Braden's Golden Flake Popcorn. But the competition is steep. She told the Kansas City Star she was working 16-hour days, 7 days a week. And she's got ads in the paper saying that her popcorn is a registered trade name and warning that any infringers will be prosecuted. And she was not bluffing. She got into spat after spat with other business owners, all of which are described in incredible detail in the newspaper.
Who knew popcorn was so dramatic?
I know. So these are a couple of the articles.
Where popcorn hostilities center. The interest of the war-loving public today was directed from the hostilities in China to the neighborhood of 31st Street and Prospect Avenue, where this popcorn stand and Mrs. J. Braden became the center of a popcorn war. Oh my God.
Like this one time, Julia heard rumors from, quote, certain members of the popcorn-eating public that she buttered her popcorn with poison. So she ends up bribing her customers to tell her who was responsible for the slander. She gets a name, and she ends up suing the couple behind a competing popcorn wagon at Prospect and 31st. Another time, she complained about price slashers on that very same corner, and she tells the paper, if he wants a battle, I'll give him a battle.
Well, I mean, in that competitive a scene, you gotta hold your own. She sounds like a fighter.
So that's your take on her, that she's a tough lady?
Yeah, she sounds like a no-bolt businesswoman.
I think what you are referring to is something we might call tenacity. And that really is how she cajoled her way into selling popcorn inside a theater in the first place. Because in the 1910s, when she was just getting started, popcorn was actually banned in movie theaters.
And now, before the next show starts, let's enjoy an intermission.
Hey, editor Gabe Rosenberg here. I hope you're enjoying this episode of A People's History of Kansas City. I just wanted to point out that there are so many other amazing stories about the cinema in Kansas City for you to check out. One of my favorite PHKC episodes is the battle over Mickey Mouse. You know, Walt Disney gets most of the credit for creating Mickey Mouse. But the truth is that Kansas City animator Ub Iwerks, who was Disney's best friend, was actually the first to bring the iconic character to life. Except then, Mickey's success almost tore them apart for good. You can check out that story and dozens more by scrolling down in the People's History feed.
So what's the deal with popcorn not being allowed in movie theaters? What's up with that?
So yeah, let's get into that. Have you been to Screenland Armor? I think you have.
Yeah, I have. They actually have a really great 90s themed bar in the basement that I really like.
I'm not surprised by this at all because they have like hundreds of VHS tapes. But anyway, yes, I went there recently and I talked to the people who run it. Okay, so we're in a room. Which theater is this?
Number 1. I'm Butch Rigby. I'm the founder of Screenland Theaters.
So Screenland Armor originally opened in 1928 as a silent movie theater.
It was right at the beginning of sound pictures.
Goodbye.
They pretty quickly became a talkie house.
I did not know it was that old. That's so cool.
Yeah, and even though Screenland Armor has been remodeled a lot over the last century, it still sort of has the same feel of this small, intimate, old-school cinema.
So I said, let's build a movie theater as if we were building it in the 1920s, but let's do it with all the modern conveniences.
It's got stadium seating, couches. Butch even commissioned this old Hollywood-style mural next to their biggest screen.
And then this is the Century, and this is a 35-millimeter movie projector. It's what I started out using and Adam started out using.
So you're kind of turning back the clock.
Yeah, it's part of the experience.
So back in the 1910s and 20s, movie theaters in Kansas City were these grand, beautiful structures with really ornate ceilings, right? And a lot of them aren't around anymore, but the ones that are still around, they have different purposes now. They're often used as music venues. I'm talking about the Gem Theater, the Madrid Theater, the Uptown. And if you look at them, you can kind of get a feel for what it used to be like. Because back then, going to the movies was a really big event. People would dress up.
An audiovisual spectacle where you get to go into another world.
Elmira Gulch, just because you own half the county doesn't mean you have the power to run the rest of us.
Take my advice. Grab the next bus back to Miami.
I didn't ask for your advice.
I like thinking about the golden era and how it used to be, and I still kind of see it that way, I feel like.
I do too. I still find movies amazing. So to think about it back then, when you had less media and things like that, it was probably really mind-blowing. But at the time, it's important to remember that popcorn has this reputation as this cheap street food, and it got everywhere when you ate it.
Yes. My partner, historically, I always joke, when I make popcorn, I'm like, are you eating any of it? It's just all over the floor.
This is pretty much the problem, and it is why movie theater owners did not want popcorn coming in. They weren't vacuuming theaters like that. It's kind of like, we can't deal with this. It's degrading our aesthetic. Basically, they made people check their popcorn at the door.
Wow. So they already had it in hand for other reasons and we're maybe trying to bring it in as a snack, and they're like, hell no.
Exactly. And this is something I talked about with historian Andrew F. Smith.
They had rugs on the floor, and they didn't really want people coming in and eating things.
Another reason why is that eating popcorn is loud, and these were silent films.
At that time, it was literally cans of films that would be shipped around from place to place.
So this is Bobby Bagby Ford. Her great-grandmother was a piano player at a small North Central Missouri theater back in the 20s.
The music didn't always come with the film, and so she would have to sort of make it up. She was super talented, And you'd say something, and when she was playing there, she'd do the like dun 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 dun. She'd basically make a soundtrack to our lives.
That's really funny.
And just as a little aside, Bobby's great-grandmother ended up marrying the owner of the theater, which I think is kind of cute. And they started B&B Theaters.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So that was like one of the parent companies of B&B Theaters.
Because B&B Theaters is a big...
It is the 5th largest theater chain in the U.S., and it is based in Liberty, Missouri.
So to recap here, we've mostly been focused on the silent movie era of the 1910s and the 1920s, a world of movie theaters without popcorn. But everything changes in 1929 when the Great Depression hits. Movies had always been these really important cultural institutions because in addition to entertainment, people also got their news there. But now, suddenly everyone really needs an escape from the real world. And it was around this time that movies with sound started gaining traction around the country.
I'm not bad, really. Things have gone wrong lately, and one's got to live, you know.
People didn't have to be literate, so they could go in, they could have a good time for a couple hours.
For as the Great Depression grips America, the public feels helpless in this national calamity. But in the darkness of a theater, they can escape. They can live vicariously in the forbidden adventures of men who take the law into their own hands.
Movie theaters weren't immune to the financial stress of the 1930s, though. Thousands closed, which made theater owners desperate for new sources of revenue. And all they had to do was look outside of their own theaters, the people selling snacks on the street, to realize they wanted in on those profits. So they got off their high horse and decided to welcome popcorn into their lobbies.
Let's all go to the lobby.
Turns out the people want snacks.
Yeah, the people want snacks.
Give the people the snacks.
The goal was to get people into the theater so your cost of admission was relatively low. And the real goal was you wanted to make money on your concession stand.
I mean, concessions are pricey, but when you're there, it's like you don't want to just sit through a whole thing without something to munch on.
Yeah, if you're not Suzanne Hogan sneaking popcorn in your purse, like you're going to pony up the money
I
for
don't
popcorn.
always do that, but I have done it.
To get ourselves a treat.
Popcorn proved particularly profitable because of the smell. You could immediately recognize it. And once World War II started, popcorn continued to thrive because it wasn't rationed like sugar was.
Chocolate candy and sugar and those things were all prevented, but there was no restrictions on popcorn.
Add sweet cream butter to hot popcorn. Mix it up, wrap it up, Buttercup is born.
It was a tremendous additive, and I think it really saved theaters in the 30s during the Depression.
So in 1931, a girl, Julia Braden, was operating 4 popcorn stands around Kansas City, all near or in movie theaters, specifically Linwood at 31st and Prospect, Isis at 31st and Troost, Lindbergh at 40th and Troost, and South Troost at 57th and Troost.
Troost had a lot of theaters. It's so cool to imagine. I mean, it makes me sad, actually, because those things aren't around as much or at all anymore. But it's so cool to kind of imagine the time machine. Like, oh, okay, there was a popcorn stand there. Oh, there was a theater there. It was such a different vibe of a street that you like maybe drive or bike down like every day.
Well, to sort of set the scene of her flagship spot then, it was the Linwood Theater, which was an extremely popular gathering place in the 40s. It's one of those really big, beautiful marquees, and it showed movies in addition to newsreels.
Men who abandon home and vocations that they may be ready to defend democracy if necessary.
And this interesting phenomenon started occurring at the Linwood Theater where women would see on the screen their brothers or their sons or husbands who were off fighting in the war, and they would faint. And I found several recorded instances of this happening, which, again, really proves this role that movie theaters were playing in people's lives. Like, it was a lot more than just entertainment. It was this really visceral and emotional experience going to the movies.
And getting to see somebody you know on a screen live, it's like that's something I think we take for granted today, with having media and phones. But back then, that would have been a really, new concept.
Yeah, and to bring it back You know, the reason theaters were even around during the war to be this role for people was popcorn sales. Back then, popcorn sold for 5 or 10 cents a bag, but it was incredibly cheap to make. So people like Julia made a huge profit.
Did she, how many employees did she have?
I don't know exactly, but she told the Kansas City Star that she had multiple employees on her payroll, and it kind of seems like she had a pretty big operation, or at least she acted like she did. According to her, she was buying 100 pounds of butter a week. She was growing her own corn on 500 acres of land. I mean, she claims she was making $15,000 a year, which is the equivalent of more than $300,000 today, which is just a staggering amount of money during the Great Depression. And you know, they were born generations apart, but Julia Braden shares some similarities with Bobby Bagby Ford, the chief creative officer at B&B Theaters. Because at the end of the day, B&B Theaters is also in the popcorn business. And Bobby, like Julia, is very competitive about it.
We do taste testing every year, spend a lot of time looking at the different way popcorn pops. Some of the most interesting fights that I've heard from my grandparents and their friends in the industry was whether you put the kernels in before when the oil is there or you wait until the oil is hot.
The key difference between Julia Braden and Bobby, though, is that they differ on what kind of popcorn to sell, because there are a lot of different types of kernels that kind of make different formations when they explode. Julia famously sold mushroom popcorn. Are you familiar with mushroom popcorn?
No.
So it's kind of round and ball-shaped, whereas Bobby swears by butterfly popcorn, which is more irregular and has bumps and wings, and it looks more like it just exploded, whereas mushroom popcorn kind of looks like a ball.
Yeah, Topsies is maybe more mushroom. They have different kinds. I think they have a mix.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up Topsies because I brought you Topsies.
Yes! Hell yes! Ah, yes!
Okay, so that is a variety pack of Topsies. And you can see that the cheese one in there especially is definitely mushroom popcorn.
I think that's why it's something about the mushroom for certain flavors. It's just the best.
Mushroom is more used for cheesy popcorn and caramel corn, things that are kind of coated,
Mm-hmm.
whereas butterfly is your classic movie popcorn.
I make butterfly at home, but yeah.
Now, I do want to say it's unclear when Julia Braden first entered the movie theater. There's this 1931 Kansas City Star article that says she had her first stand inside the theater lobby in 1915. But I asked Andrew about this, and he's not so sure.
Unlikely.
He says no one was selling popcorn in movie theaters back then. Is it conceivable, though, that a really bossy woman would have been able to talk her way into a movie theater before the Great Depression?
It would have been very unusual prior to the 1930s if anybody started selling popcorn in lobbies.
But admittedly, Andrew didn't write about Julia in his book because he didn't know about her. So it's hard to say. Andrew says what we know for sure is that Julia was definitely one of the early popcorn sellers to make their way into the theater lobby. So it puts her in this really impressive cohort of entrepreneurial women during the Great Depression.
Julia Braden was a perfect example of someone who thrived during that period of time in the early 1930s, and she was a tremendous success.
So do we know how this fared for her? I mean, was that a good move? Did she end up being successful and then happy selling popcorn in theaters?
This is always such a hard question because we can never say for sure, but she did tell the Kansas City Star that she was on the cusp of buying her own home thanks to how well business was going, and that had been one of her longtime dreams. I don't know if she ever remarried, but I know she raised a son here in Kansas City, and at one point she was living with several other family members. So I think she liked it here, and I think she was happy. She died in 1950 at the age of 88. And today, part of her legacy is that popcorn is still a huge part of going to the movies. And the popcorn markup continues to be absolutely ludicrous. So I said that a bag of popcorn was originally 5 or 10 cents back in Julia's days. These days, a small bag of popcorn might cost you $6, but take 60 cents to make, which is a 1,000% markup.
Wow. Oh my God. But hey,
It obviously differs from theater to theater, but according to Andrew, popcorn sales alone generate nearly 40% of all movie theater profits.
It's our largest source of revenue, actually. You've got to remember the studios, they made the movie. They have the actors. They have to pay all these people, including the costumers and the makeup and the set designers and all of that. And so they take a large percentage of ticket sales, like a lot of percentage of the ticket sales. And so really we make our income from concession sales. And obviously popcorn is our number one seller.
So in a way, popcorn saved movie theaters back in the 1930s. And here in 2025, it's still keeping movie theaters around.
Popcorn sales just generated because of people like Julia Braden, and they made a lot of money compared to a lot of other people. So she was a tremendous success, and I think that's a wonderful story. And I regret that I didn't put it in my book. But if I ever revise the book, I will incorporate that story.
So the popcorn guy admits that he maybe overlooked our heroine.
Yes.
Maybe that makes you the popcorn guy.
No, I'm already so much, but A People's History of Kansas City was reported, produced, and mixed this month by me, Mackenzie Martin, with editing by Gabe Rosenberg and Suzanne Hogan. You heard sound from Sarah Reinhart, Topsies, Manly Popcorn, Casablanca, The Jazz Singer, The Wizard of Oz, It Happened One Night, and Blackmail. In addition to music from New Edition, Andre Williams, Sousa's Band, Prince's Orchestra, The Supremes, Frank Sinatra, Gene Kelly, Paul Whiteman, Paul Tremaine Orchestra, Something Weird, and Blue Dot Sessions. We are a production of KCUR Studios, a podcast network in Kansas City, Missouri. And make sure you're subscribed to the show because we'll be back next month with another episode about the underdogs and renegades who created Kansas City and the region. Until then, I'm Mackenzie Martin. Thank you so much for listening.
I'm sometimes against like dramatic language, like calling something a war that's not really a war, but it is. I mean, like, you're like, damn.
My take from doing these episodes about food is that everything was a war.
Everything was a war.
Biscuits, burgers, it was all a war.